have you ever found yourself listening to something in Korean, whether it was a TV show or like audio from your textbook, only to find yourself struggling to understand what exactly they're saying, only to then check the transcripts and realize that you actually knew quite a lot of it, and then thought to yourself, why is it that I'm not able to hear and recognize these words that I already know when they're being spoken? In the last year or so, I've really focused on ways to improve my listening comprehension, and I'm starting to see a lot of results with those methods. So in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about listening comprehension in Korean and give you guys some advice in how to improve your listening comprehension that isn't just listen to Korean more. Then if you're anything like me, then you might think the idea of improving your listening comprehension is a little bit confusing. If you keep listening to the language, you might find that nothing seems to be happening. And it can come down to several things. It could even just come down to the style of the person speaking. You could hear two different people saying the same thing and then be able to understand it when one person says it, but not when the other one says it. So before we dive into ways to improve your listening comprehension, I first wanted to talk about Korean pronunciation. The first thing that I want to talk about with pronunciation is going to be so eye-opening if you have never heard this before. But when I started meeting with my Korean tutor who's been helping me with my speaking and pronunciation, this tutor introduced to me the idea that Korea kind of has a pitch accent. Yeah, right? And from a linguistic point of view, if it's actually truly a pitch accent language, I don't know that. For all intents and purposes, there is a usage of pitch in the language to discern different consonant sounds from each other. And this is also going to tie into intonation. So before you get lost with this explanation, let me just show you, because I tried to write it down on this paper. Basically, like your standard single consonants are going to be pronounced with a low pitch. And then all of these consonants here are going to be pronounced with a high pitch. So once I became aware of this pronunciation, it's really helped me discern between these similar consonant sounds when people are speaking, and it's helped me pick up on words a lot better. Now, apart from my tutor, I have never seen formally this written anywhere about Korean pronunciation, but if you are aware of this and you start to pay attention when you're listening, you're going to start to notice that it's there. The other thing that I want to talk about with Korean pronunciation is something that you guys probably are familiar with. Like, this is not going to be so groundbreaking, but I think it needs to be re-emphasized, is that in Korean, especially when you work with 받침, the like consonant sound at the bottom of the syllable, that consonant sound changes sometimes when it meets another consonant in the next syllable. A good example is the word for museum. Museum is written like with a 기역 at the bottom, like 박물관, like this. But people don't say 박물관, they say 박물관. And it becomes kind of like a niang sound. I think that this is something that a lot of you guys are probably familiar with because there's a lot of resources out there to learn about this. But if you are someone who is not too strongly familiar with those irregulars and like how the sounds can be different than how they are written, then that's something you definitely want to review and be somewhat familiar with when you are trying to work with your listening comprehension, because if you don't know how something is pronounced in the first place, there's no way for you to hear it. Because if you think it's said a certain way but it's not and it's said a different way, then like, how are you gonna know? And I think that's a problem that many of us are facing, but we don't always realize it. And one more thing that I want to point out to you guys is that when it comes to listening to a language, there's I don't know how many people in Korea and in the world who are native speakers in Korean, and everyone has a different voice. To some extent, a lot of our listening practice could be with the easiest speakers of all, but I would argue that we need to spend more time practicing with people who are difficult to understand, because if they are difficult for you as the non-native speaker to understand, but to other native speakers, they're very easy and normal and clear, then that is probably a sign you really need to listen to more examples of that way of speaking. And that's something that I feel like affects a lot of us, and that could actually be why you might feel your listening comprehension isn't that high. So basically, if you're going to take away any advice from this point, is don't get discouraged if you find certain people difficult to listen to. You just need to practice with that certain demographic and you'll eventually figure out what they're saying. Okay, now's the fun part where we start to talk about ways to actually improve your listening comprehension. The first method that I have is going to involve really working intensively with some sort of listening material. So first, I will take out the audio recording and I won't actually even read the text. I just want to listen to it and try really, really hard to understand everything that's being said. And then also while I'm listening, I'm going to try to think about like if there's anything that I've heard but I feel like I don't know what this word is, then I'll take my best guess at what that word is and I just write it down. And then another thing that I do is I try to be aware of moments when I'm listening where I feel like there's this little bit here that I didn't catch. The next thing I'll do is I will read the text, but when I read the text, I will play the audio recording and I will listen and read along in like silently in my head. And so what I'll do is I will first mark off any new words, whether I heard them or not. And then I will also mark those areas where when I was listening, I didn't quite catch what was being said. And then I will basically just keep reading along. In my head, I will read the passage while listening to the audio, and I will particularly focus on those areas where it was either new words or the little phrases and words that I knew but I didn't actually hear. And when it comes to those parts of the passage, I will usually pause the audio recording and do a little bit of like targeted listening and repeating, because I have personally found that oftentimes, if our listening comprehension is struggling when it comes to words we already know, then the problem might be tied a little bit to our pronunciation. And as I said earlier, the pronunciation tips I gave, if you are more aware of how to pronounce something correctly, naturally your ability to listen to it and to point it out when someone else is talking just goes up. And then the last thing that I will do, I will close the book, stop looking at the words, and then I will keep listening again to the audio a few more times and really focus on like make sure that I can hear the words that I just studied, that the parts that I was practicing that I didn't hear before, I really try to listen and see if I can pick up on them again. But this method, hands down, has really helped my listening comprehension, tied in with the knowledge about high and low pitch, because as you're listening, this is going to actually really help you guys, I think. The next method that I recommend for listening comprehension is to always watch things and read along at the same time. I think in general, if you're going to do any sort of listening practice, like active listening practice with Korean, I think you should always have some sort of text. So if you want to watch a Korean TV show for the purpose of improving your listening comprehension, I highly recommend just watching a Netflix, K-drama, whatever, and turning on Korean subtitles, and then just shamelessly read the entire text as you go. But the benefit is, if you're watching the show and you're just enjoying the content, you're not really thinking a whole lot about what you're learning. But the fact that you read along the entire time, you get to hear different people talking throughout the show, and you will probably understand the reading a lot more than you understand what people are saying at times. But because you are reading and listening at the same time, you're giving yourself more opportunities to practice building that connection between the words and what you're hearing, because some of the words you might have heard before, you already know, but maybe you don't recognize them in context. Maybe in the TV show, there might be certain people who are hard to listen to, but because you can read what they're saying, you can sort of start to make this connection between like, oh, this is how some people would say this word. And then my third method is passive listening comprehension practice, and it is basically the standard advice that you'll get from anyone is just listen to more Korean. While passive listening to Korean is not by itself going to significantly boost your listening comprehension, it is worthwhile, it is fun, and then it's probably going to be more focused on just pure entertainment and things that you enjoy. And that's fine too. I think that does count. That does help your listening comprehension. But by itself, I don't think that it's going to make a huge impact. So if you can only choose one or you only have time for one, I highly recommend the first method that I explained because it's just going to be the most efficient one for you guys. And then the last thing that I want to say is just be consistent and patient with yourself. Whether you have a little bit of time every day or just a couple days a week, it doesn't matter as long as you're being consistent with your approach. You will eventually start to see improvements. If you want to learn more about my speaking practice, pronunciation practice, or a little bit more about the high and low pitch that I discussed earlier in this video, comment down below. If you guys are interested, I'll make a video about that as well. Otherwise, I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!